Hi everyone, this is Ray, and I just want to talk about a few of the video games I've picked up recently. And I'll start with this one here. This is Mega Man X3 on the Sega Saturn. And this is basically the same game you know on the Super Nintendo, but with full motion cutscenes, remix soundtrack, and redone sound effects for like the X-Buster and stuff like that. It's a really good game, but this version has some pretty big flaws, and one is a very extreme load time at the beginning of the game. When you boot the game up, there's about a 1 minute to 2 minute load until the opening cutscene starts up. And the other big flaw is on the left and right sides of the screen there are borders, and although they're not black borders, they're kind of specialized for each stage that you're on. I just don't think it's necessary. For some reason, this is the only port with that. The Sony PlayStation version, from what I've seen, does not have that, and that doesn't make sense to me because it's widely agreed upon that the Sega Saturn was a pretty big 2D beast at its time. Anyway, it's a good game regardless. Pick it up if you got a Sega Saturn and you're a Mega Man fan, and you won't be disappointed. Next up, we have Mega Man 8 on the Sega Saturn. This is probably the least popular entry in the series, but when I originally rented it on the Sony PlayStation, I thought it was a pretty good game. I tracked this one down for a while before I actually found it at a reasonable price. This is a very expensive game, by the way. If you're a collector, just be aware of that. What makes the Sega Saturn version so special, other than the fact I'm a Sega Saturn fanboy, of course, is that there are exclusive Cutman and Woodman boss fights, as well as an exclusive fan artwork gallery. And there's supposedly a different soundtrack. I have not played this yet, but I've heard that it has a different soundtrack, and I have to say I've heard the Tengu Man stage, and that's definitely superior to the PlayStation version. Pick this up if you're a really big Mega Man fan. Next up, we have Rayman 2: The Great Escape on the Nintendo 64. One of the greatest 3D platforms ever created. Now, when I originally played this, it was on the Nintendo 64, and I think it was the only console port around at the time. But when I rented it, I brought it home and I realized it needed a memory pack. Now, at the time, the only Nintendo 64 games I had really come across that required a memory pack were sports games, so I never really picked it up. So that was a little bit surprising, and what I ended up doing is I left the Nintendo 64 on for an entire week to finish this game. So it should be good to finally sit down, not feel rushed through this game, and be able to save and everything. Really good game. You should definitely pick it up if you've never played it. It's available on practically every platform known to man now, and there's actually one coming out on the 3DS, so that's pretty cool. Sin and Punishment on the Nintendo 64. This is only available in Japan, and I played it on the Virtual Console quite a bit, and I really liked it, so I decided to import it because I'm more of a classic gamer, and I'm also a collector, of course, so having a digital download, it doesn't really do me much good. I played a little bit of this on the Nintendo 64. I'm saving it sort of for a treasure marathon that I'm going to be doing, and I have to say the controls are way better with the Nintendo 64 controller. The classic controller didn't work quite as well for some reason. I don't know, it's a better controller design really, but I think this game was more designed around the original Nintendo 64 controller. So if you're a fan at all of the game, I think it would be best to pick it up on the Nintendo 64. Sin and Punishment Star Successor on the Nintendo Wii. Now, I don't pick up very many newer games, but I'm a really big Treasure fan, so I was originally going to pick this up on launch, but I didn't feel it was right without owning the original Nintendo 64 version, so it took me quite a while to get around to this one. Everything I've seen in trailers looks really good. The IR controls that the Wiimote gives you should be really good, and I saw a few side-scrolling sections. That's really cool. I'm really looking forward to playing this. Bangai-O on the Nintendo 64. Most people probably know this game by the Dreamcast port, and that's because it was the only version of the game released outside of Japan. And even so, the Nintendo 64 version was released in a very limited run in Japan. There were only 10,000 copies ever produced. It's a really cool game. I don't really know all the differences yet, but I've heard there's quite a few, and the differences are big enough that it makes it worth playing along with the Dreamcast version. If you haven't played this game before, it's really unique. It's kind of a shooter, but it's like free roaming. You can go anywhere, and the object of the game really is to build up your special attack, which launches hundreds of missiles around the screen. And the closer the enemy attacks are to hitting you, the more missiles you launch. So that's really cool. Really good game. Pick it up. Probably on the Dreamcast, because this was very expensive, and it's only really worth it if you're a collector or a big fan of the Nintendo 64 like I am. Another treasure game. This is Silhouette Mirage on the Sega Saturn, and another game that was also localized in North America. It was localized on the Sony PlayStation, and they had to make a few cuts to the visuals, like the background and stuff like that. But the bigger issue is when this game was published over here, it was published by Working Designs, who I'm usually a big fan of. I mean, they've published things like Dragon Force, the Lunar games, Elemental Gearbolt, but when they published this game, they made a lot of changes to it, and the changes are for the worse, probably. This is a really cool action game. It actually uses a concept that seems like it inspired Ikaruga, also made by Treasure. Pick it up. If you really don't mind the changes, you can probably get the PlayStation version, but it's probably better that you import it either on the Sega Saturn or PlayStation, because the Japanese PlayStation version does not have any of the changes. So pick it up. Next up, I've got a few NES games. This is Stinger, and Stinger is actually the second game in the Twin Bee series. And what I've played of the Twin Bee series, I've really enjoyed it, so I thought I'd pick up Stinger, the NES port. I hope I pronounced these next two games correctly. I'm sorry if I don't. The next one is Zexys, and it was created by Hudson Soft. They made some really good stuff back then, so I'm really looking forward to this one. This one was actually recommended to me on a gaming forum, so I'll give that one a try. And the next one is another game I have not played before, Fazanadu, I think that's how you pronounce it. And this is not made by Falcom. This is actually licensed to Hudson Soft, and from what I've seen, it looks like a really good game. It's sort of the Legend of Zelda 2 style. Should be good. Cobra Triangle on the NES. I played a little bit of this when I was younger, and I enjoyed it, so I picked it up. With the box and manual, it was only $3, so that's a really good deal. I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but this game was actually developed by Rare, so that's a good sign. Little Nemo the Dream Master, one of the few Capcom games on the NES I have not played yet. I've heard it's really good. It looks like a really good platformer. Now what's funny is I actually bought two of these, and that's because one of them came with the manual, as you can see in here, and the other came with the box.